So thank you everyone. We are here for another week of Joint School Live. And this week we will be digging into and examining the fascinating topic of safety and innovation of orthopedic implants. And with us today, we have Mr. Keith Tucker, who is at the very forefront of this move. So thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So before we start digging into some of the topics around this, and as ever, thank you so much to those of you who've sent in questions and suggestions. And I know this is something that a few people have asked about and wondered about. How, questions like, how do I know that an implant is safe? How is the safety of implants monitored? And so on and so forth. And we will dig into these questions in good time shortly. But before we do that, Mr. Tucker, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've come to be an expert on this particular topic?
Thank you. Not sure an expert, but yes, I am a doctor primarily. Went to medical school and then eventually became a surgeon and then an orthopedic surgeon and a consultant in Norfolk and Norwich Hospital, which is a hospital in this country which has a reputation for joint replacement. And I think that's where my interest started. I was Ken McKee's houseman. Ken McKee was the McKee out of the McKee-Farrow total hip replacement, which was arguably the first successful mass production hip replacement in the world. Certainly for a short time. The Charnley took over, but the metal-on-metal total hip, it was used around the world for a good many years. And I was his houseman, so I saw what was going on. I was absolutely fascinated. That was then I became a senior registrar and so on and so forth. And eventually I took over his firm as a consultant. So I saw lots of hip replacements and hip replacements which had failed. So my interest was stimulated in a big way from an early stage in my orthopedic career. Then I went on to develop a hip replacement with Hugh Phillips in Norwich, the Norwich hip, which wasn't particularly successful. But that led on to me becoming the MDA, it's now the MHRA representative for the British Orthopaedic Association, and yes, secretary, then president of the Hip Society, and so on. And so all the way along the line, I was seeing what was going on in my own practice and also around the country and around the world. And I think with a large number of other people, we realized that we've got to do better. The Swedes had been doing it with their National Joint Registry. We hadn't got a registry. And we thought, we really must. So yes, I got hugely involved in the argument. I was one of the people who argued very strongly for a National Joint Registry. And with that came ODEP. And that was on the back of the 3M capital hip problems, as was the National Joint Registry. And I was asked to chair that. So yeah, everything in my career has sort of been leading up to that point. And I've been the chairman of ODEP, Orthopaedic Data Evaluation Panel, since 2002. And been on the National Joint Registry Steering Committee and so on. So yes, that's where it's taken me today. And in the last few years, we've been running Beyond Compliance as well. So, and that's my main job these days, is to chair ODEP and also the advisory group for Beyond Compliance.
Fascinating. And you've mentioned quite a few different organizations there that I'm sure many people will come across as soon as you start searching online around implants for hip replacements, but indeed also for knee replacements, shoulder replacements, and so on. And that's the MHRA, Beyond Compliance, ODEP, and the National Joint Registry. Without digging in, giving us too much detail, could you give an overview of how these different organizations sit alongside each other?
Well, firstly, I'd just like to add that my orthopedic training and my orthopedic practice was very general. Although I did a huge number of hips, I've done over 5,000, and a large number of knees. I also saw patients with shoulder problems. I did a shoulder fellowship at one time. So I've been very fortunate that I feel that I've been in a position, and spine, I did a lot of spinal surgery. So when it comes to looking at implants in all these disciplines, I've got a half decent idea. Have been very lucky. Whereas sometimes some people just do either hips or knees. I was fortunate or unfortunate to have a spread. Now, in answer to your question, MHRA that's took over from the MDA. That's the competent authority in this country that oversees the notified bodies and oversees all implants. The Medicine and Health Service Regulatory Agency based in London. National Joint Registry, that's NJR, that's run by Health Quality Improvement Partnership, HQIP. Yes, that's an amazing thing. We've now got 3 million uploads in the National Joint Registry, and that's been going since about 2003. Every time anybody has a total hip, a total shoulder, a total knee, a total ankle, total elbow, all their data is loaded up into the National Joint Registry. So we have an amazing database of information.
Is it the biggest in the world of its kind?
Yes, it is. Yes, yes. And I think it's the most, well, arguably the most sophisticated. And one of the great things about our National Joint Registry is the manufacturers have access to it very easily, which means they can see what's going on with their implants.
Okay, interesting. I mean, and I guess that goes hand in hand. Like transparency is a sort of a core philosophy, or is that the core of this whole endeavor, really? I guess.
Oh yes, yes, I think so. We've got to collect data, but there's no point in collecting data unless it's used, unless people see it. It's got to be fed back, and it's got to be unfettered. It's got to be data which is absolutely squeaky clean.
Yeah. And then ODEP. So you mentioned ODEP a few.
Well, that's certainly been my particular baby. So National Joint Registry and ODEP really came in the wake of the disaster of the 3M capital hip, which was such a horrendous thing to happen. Just to remind everybody, it was a total hip replacement, which looked perfectly all right. And I'd just like to say, may I say at this stage, nobody goes out of their way to design something which actually messes people up. I mean, we must always remember that. But anyhow, this was a hip which was based on a Charlie. It was a different metal in many of them. It was a different shape, and it had amazingly different results. Charlies were doing fine. This thing was a disaster. But at that time, we didn't even know who had got these things. And so when we noticed with a series that came out of Aberdeen that they weren't doing well, we'd got no way of actually contacting everybody, and it became a government issue. And that was really what triggered it. We've got to have a registry so that if we do want to contact patients, we can. When you buy a car, if it starts going wrong, or if that particular brand goes wrong, the manufacturer is very able to contact everybody who's bought one. We needed to do the same with joint replacements, and that's what we've done. So that's the prime reason for any registry, is to be able to contact patients if things are not right. But of course, by collecting all this data, we can then find out what's good, what's bad. We also can tell which surgeons aren't doing very well. And so the National Joint Registry has within it a group that looks at implants. I set that up and chaired it for a long time. And another group which actually looks at surgeon performance. And then we have a research group that actually oversees the research which is done on this massive database. And we publish annually. So it is a very big organization. ODEP, as I say, we started at the same time. And in ODEP, we evaluate implants. We started off with hips, and NICE stimulated that. And then we went over to knees and shoulders. But it's not the same as the National Joint Registry by any manner of means. We use National Joint Registry data, but what happens with ODEP is that manufacturers submit data which they have to collect to support the ongoing use of their implant in the UK. it's the onus is on them, and they can get data from other registries or other part. We accept podium presentation data, we accept publications, and so they have to get together data to support the ongoing use of their products in this country. Because in the UK, there are hospitals, and so hospitals don't like buying implants which haven't got an ODEP rating. Surgeons don't like using products which haven't got an ODEP rating. ODEP's unique, and the and that's what it's about. It's to make sure that the products that patients are getting have been carefully assessed.
Yeah, okay, okay. So, the National Joint Registry is this sort of groundbreaking database to monitor the safety of orthopedic implants, and ODEP is a kite mark for orthopedic implants. That import is based on the data collected by.
Yeah, I think that's yeah. But ODEP uses data. We benchmark implants from all around the world. They don't have to necessarily be used in this country, but we set benchmarks. They are set on revision rates for particular time points, 3, 5, 7, 10, 13, and shortly to be 15 years. So we have a particular set of criteria which relates to each of these time points. And for a manufacturer to get one of these benchmarks, say a 13A star benchmark for their total hip replacement, they've got to have a certain number of cases, the cohort as we call it, that goes through. It's got to have a revision rate, which is inside what we set as being the benchmark. And it's got to the data's got to come from several centers, and they've got to explain to us exactly what was the cause of revisions, if there have been revisions. So we tie them down to some pretty tight data. So when they get an ODEP benchmark, it does mean that the manufacturer's been put through the mill, actually.
And so as a patient, as someone getting ready for surgery, or indeed even if a family member of mine is having a hip replacement or a knee replacement, how can I find out which the ODEP rating for the relevant implant that's being planned?
Well, yeah, let's face it, Axel. The first thing you want to be sure about is making sure the surgeon that's going to do your operation's any good. I think you as a surgeon would recognize that. Yeah. And don't try and persuade a surgeon to do an operation he's not used to. Go and find another surgeon if you don't like that particular implant. Yeah. But yes, you need to know the name of the implant the surgeon's planning for you. Yeah. And then you go to the ODEP website, ODEP, www.odep.org, and then you can just punch in the name of that particular implant, and it will give you the ODEP rating.
Okay, well, and we will, of course, we'll make sure that the link to the ODEP website is beneath this video. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, that there's many more factors than the implant in terms of ensuring safe surgery and good outcomes from any operation. But I think in this regard, we're focusing on the implant itself. And you mentioned the rating system and the star rating. So let's say then I go onto the ODEP website and I put in the name of the implant that's being planned for me. Should I be concerned if that implant does not have a star rating?
Well, there's A, B, and A star ratings. Mm-hmm. B is not B for bad. B is for boutique. Okay. And it's just as tough to get a B in terms of the revision rate as an A star. But there are certain implants, as you know, which are only used in certain circumstances, and we want to make sure that those implants are still available. And sometimes they're only used in a very small number of centers. Mm-hmm. Perhaps it's a new implant when the manufacturer is just introducing it very slowly through a limited number of centers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. A is where we started off, and it's the methodology is on the website. It explains that the confidence intervals for an A rating are wider than from A star.
Mm-hmm.
But an A star rating is the top rating, which for a 10 A star for a total hip is less than 5% failure rate at 10 years.
Okay. So there's rigorous processes to ensure that orthopedic implants are monitored, and these, by and large, have been in place since the turn of the century and are being rolled out increasingly.
Yes, that's right. We started arguing in favor of National Joint Registry and ODEP in about 1997, I suppose, and we got our way by about 2002. But it was sad that we've been arguing, the orthopedic profession has been arguing for a registry for 30 years before, 20 years before then. But it took a disaster to actually get our way.
Yeah, that's a shame. But it's now in place, and I guess it's something really quite positive and groundbreaking that's come from all that pain and
Yeah, it did take another lot of pain to actually get the next bit of this story going, which is beyond compliance, because there was still a gap between the CE mark and the ODEP 3A, which is the first benchmark in ODEP.
Yeah, which of course takes at least 3 years and probably more.
And a bit more, yeah. And it was in that gap that the metal-on-metal hip replacements and the ASR and various other bad things fell. And so one of the things you have to remember is that when somebody's got a CE mark, European law is such that you can't interfere with people selling it. If it's got a CE mark, the manufacturer has the legal right to sell it. So actually to start saying, well, we don't like it, is a little bit dangerous. So if you take the CE mark as compliance, what we said, well, Peter Kay and Mick Boroff and myself and a few others said, well, why don't we just go beyond compliance entirely voluntarily and actually ask them to set up a system where we looked a lot more critically. We assessed the thing for risk. We advised on the rate of introduction to the market, and we actually put some pretty tough tests on new implants, and that's where beyond compliance started, and that was in about 2012. But that followed the introduction of the problems with the metal-on-metal hip replacements, which are well documented. Yeah. So we now fill that gap between the CE mark and the CE mark. I sometimes get criticized for suggesting that the CE mark is a badge of expectation. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but it is actually, that is it. I mean, you're well tested before you get a CE mark for an implant. But it's the expectation it's going to do well, but it's only time which will determine whether that expectation has been met.
Yeah. And so with beyond compliance, there's something that patients can play an active role in helping to ensure safety of implants.
Absolutely.
I mean, and I guess that goes for any procedure, really, in terms of making sure that you follow up with the PROM surveys that will no doubt be sent to you either digitally or on paper form. But certainly there may well be some people watching this video who are getting ready for an operation or have had an operation with a beyond compliance implant, in which case there's then some extra surveys, and there's sort of an added role that you as a patient can play in terms of helping to inform how this implant is doing.
Well, absolutely. And earlier we were discussing about patients having a ODEP rating of 10 or 13, 15 or something. Yeah. And the suggestion is that that's the best thing to have. And in many ways that's right. But on the other hand, maybe there's a new axial total hip replacement coming along, which actually is going to last 40 years, 50 years. But it's going to have to start somewhere. Yeah. So beyond compliance is about protecting patients, but also supporting innovation. Yeah. This country has been pretty good at innovation.
No, it has
And,
indeed.
and so, you know, on the one hand, we don't want new things to hurt patients, but on the other hand, to stop developing things, I don't think that's sensible. I think there is room for improvement. There's some very young people are getting joint replacements these days, and it would be lovely to think that we could design something which would last 50 years, and I think that's perfectly possible.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think you've kind of preempted my next question, which was going
Sorry.
to no. But I'm going to ask it anyway because I think it's worth exploring a bit further. And this idea that, well, hip replacements have been around for a long time and they've been successful for a long time, as have knee replacements. And is there a role for innovation still? Why is innovation important?
Well, I think that's
I'm playing devil's advocate here.
No, I think it's a very, very good question, and there are some people in this country who think we don't need to go any further. We've got all the answers. I think, first of all, well, it's all about how long these things are going to last. That's the most important thing. Yeah. Now, when I was a houseman, and a man of 64, 65 came in with an arthritic hip, and they would ask me, how long do you think this is going to last? And I used to say, well, we think it's going to last 10 years. Well, that'd be enough for me. Well, in those days, the life expectancy of a male of 63 was somewhere in the 70s. Yeah. But now that's not true. And, that man's life expectancy is well into the 80s. And of course, if he was a woman, it'd be well into the 90s. Yeah. So we've actually, we've made it, modern medicine has made it necessary for us to get these things to last longer. Yeah. And that's besides the fact that young people have total hip replacement. Young people always used to have total hip replacements and total knee replacement, total shoulders, but increasingly so these days because they work. Yeah. And so, yes, that's the first thing. And then, of course, there's function. And you were talking a few moments ago about PROMs. And that's why it's so important to engage with patients to get them to feedback as to what they feel about a particular implant. Because, as to say, one thing is to design something which lasts forever. But on the other hand, you really want it to do the job really well. People play sport with joint replacements. My patients regularly used to play tennis and golf and so on and so forth, cricket. And I told them not to play contact sports, but I never knew exactly what they got up to, I don't suppose. Yeah. But if let's take a golfer. I mean, to hit a really good golf shot, your knee needs to bend a bit, and it also needs to be stable. Yeah. Yeah. And so actually getting the balance with knee replacements between a good range of movement and stability is one of the challenges. It is now pretty possible to get a knee replacement to last 25 years. The majority of them are doing that. But there are some which are rather stiff, and the patient puts up with it, doesn't want to have a revision, but really doesn't bend very far. Yeah. And maybe it doesn't feel terribly stable. But, some of the new ones, they're certainly claiming a better range of movement and increased stability. So, yes, I think if I was a patient having a knee replacement, I would love to have one which actually bent well and was stable. Yeah. That's just an example.
Yeah, and the other week here on Joint School, we had the pleasure of Professor Justin Cobb joining us, and he spoke, sort of touched on some of these points around there's the difference between ensuring safety and then trying to ensure success as far as possible.
Absolutely.
And I think,
Yeah, Justin's a good friend of mine, and I think what he's doing is great, and I think that his concept of PROMs is very enlightening, and I think he's made some very, very good points.
Yeah, no, indeed.
But a few moments ago, you mentioned patient feedback, and certainly for new devices, if that device is in the Beyond Compliance portfolio, we do need patients to consent for us to look at their data. Yeah. in this country we get pretty yeah, we've got some pretty strong rules about consent for data being available to a third party, and rightly so. But it does mean that if we're to function properly and do a good job for us all and for that individual patient, we do need their written consent for us to look at their data. It's anonymized. We don't see it's Mrs. Smith from Brighton, but we do see that a person from Brighton had a knee replacement, and we can actually trace it back through a very convoluted passageway to if it went wrong to Mrs. Smith, but it would be via the hospital.
Yeah, yeah. And if we look ahead, then where do you think? So we've established that there is a role for innovation, and the ODEP marks will carry on. But what do you see as the next steps for ODEP, for beyond compliance, for the National Joint Registry?
Well, I think taking ODEP to start with is that it does seem to be pretty popular. And so I've got 2 points to make there. First of all, it is used pretty much throughout the world. And the EFORT, the European Federation of Orthopaedics and Traumatology, they want to adopt it for European countries in spite of the fact we've got Brexit on the horizon. Yes, I gave a talk in India recently. India wants to embrace ODEP. But ODEP for the moment is hips, knees, shoulders. Shortly, it's likely to be spine. The spine guys, they reckon there's a lot of spinal implants out there which aren't properly monitored, and they think that by getting the ODEP process going, which means that manufacturers have to find data to support the ongoing use of their implant.
Yeah.
That will be a discipline which will actually protect patients with spinal implants in the years to come. It's going to be different because we use revision as an endpoint in shoulders, hips, and knees. Spines, if it doesn't work, it doesn't usually get taken out. We're going to have to use PROMs. So we're going to have to be smart. But the ODEP process is being discussed with the spinal group, as it's also being discussed with plastic surgeons, with urological surgeons, with vascular surgeons, cardiac surgeons. We've been in discussion with all these groups because they want to, well, they're talking about introducing a similar system for the implants used in their specialty. Right. So that's where ODEP goes. Oh, I suppose another thing is that, you know, we're now introducing the 15-year rating because there's a lot of data around at 15 years now. It'd be silly to have data that available and not make use of it. Yeah. Where we stop, I don't know. 20, 25 years, I don't know. Yeah. It'll be somebody else besides me that will be giving that talk at that stage, I think. Anyhow, so that's ODEP. In terms of National Joint Registry, where's that going? I think that, yes, we're getting more and more data. We've linked up with the EPRD, the German registry, and together that is going to be absolutely amazing database. And the more data we get, there is the bigger risk of what I described years ago as camouflage. If you have, say, a brand of knee replacement, which appears to be doing well, but if you have within that brand some variants that might not be doing quite so well, you have to be able to drill down. So making the registry more granular so you can actually look at various types or various options within that system. You can look at, you know, the sizes, you could look at the different types of materials or whatever within that brand separately. That's also increasingly important these days. Now we've got the numbers. Yeah. So becoming more granular, and therefore you can undertake wider analyses. That's certainly where it's going.
Yeah. So plenty more work still to be done.
Yeah, and then there's beyond compliance, yeah. And I think that Um, uh, just like to mention Cumberledge, the Baroness Cumberledge, who's produced the report on implants in this country after the failings of some medication and also the vaginal meshes. She makes the point that we really need to be looking at the space between when somebody does their very first implantation and getting the CE mark. And that space is increasing at the moment because of the new medical device regulations that are coming out of Europe, the MDR. Yeah. Until now, well, until a year or so ago, if you had a new implant, if it looked vaguely like one that was successful and was already on the market, you could get it onto the market by the process of called equivalence through the notified body. And you could get it, and you could get the CE mark, and you could put it into your patients there and then, bang.
Sort of a frog leaping on the work that's been done on a previous similar model.
That's right. Yep. On what an equivalent prosthesis, or in America, a predicate.
Yeah.
And predicate means it doesn't necessarily have clinical data behind it. Equivalent is a European word, which means it does have clinical data behind it. Anyhow, you could start off with could have a Keith Tucker hip. If it looked vaguely like an Exeter, then we could get a CE mark and we could start putting it into patients without a clinical trial. We would have to let the notified body know a bit about it, but we could get on with it. With the new medical device regulations that are going to be instituted next year, well, they are already in place, really, but it's going to be, there was pushback for a year because of COVID. There's going to have to be a pre-CE clinical investigation of maybe 200 or 300 patients. Nobody's decided how big cohorts should be at a preclinical, pre-CE point, but we think that beyond compliance, which at the moment is post-CE, should move into that pre-CE space. We've been doing a survey on that recently. We've got several manufacturers say, yes, you definitely should be doing that. I think that's what we ought to do. It's certainly what Baroness Cumberledge said we should do, because external validation of a new implant is important. So I think that's an exciting thing for Beyond Compliance. And also with Beyond Compliance, again, just like with ODEP, we've had interest from the cardiac people, the spine people, the vascular people, the plastics people. So it's a model which there is interest from other specialties to run it out. And when it comes to the sort of stuff you do, it's even more important that we get patient feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that was very much emphasized in the Cumberledge report.
Yeah, indeed, and both to help to ensure safety, but also to get that more granular view to help to also see the level of success, the level of satisfaction with a procedure, with an implant.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, you say revision for those implants where we can use revision, like total hip and total knee, is still a blunt tool. Yeah. Because if you've got a hip replacement which has failed miserably and it's jolly painful, but you aren't fit enough to have a revision, it doesn't clock up the word revision. Yeah. But if you had a bad PROM score, then it would be it was important data.
Yeah. So there's still holes, and I guess that's why you need several layers of different types of information to build the full picture.
Yes, and I think when it comes to PROMs, I think you guys have set the pace. It really needs to be with an app or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think just quick, personalized, digital. There's different ways to go about it, but certainly for those who are watching this, who may well be using the Joint School app, those surveys there are really just sort of self-referential to enable people to track to track your own progress. But absolutely, we hope that it helps to raise awareness around the role of surveys in setting a baseline before an intervention, such as a hip replacement or a knee replacement, and then seeing progress over time. And so by all means, to everyone watching this now, do make sure that you do that you do fill out your prom surveys. And I mean, it's a strange thing, as someone who's now been spending the best part of 5 years working all my waking hours in the realm of patient reported outcomes. It struck me the other day that after my own spinal operation some 8 years ago, I failed to return the 1 year prom survey, just because I was then back to working in hospital. I was running around. I remember seeing it coming, put it on the kitchen surface someplace, and then not too long thereafter I moved to another hospital, and there we go. So,
well, we're just testing out our the app for Beyond Compliance at the moment. I think that I don't know whether our guys have been talking to you recently, but yeah, it's going to be done in such a way that if you don't reply, you're going to get a reminder. So you wouldn't be able to dump the bit of paper.
Yeah, and really, I think a lot of the challenges here is it's been the fault of us as clinicians, I think, because we've not made it easy enough for people to report on how they're doing. We've not made it. It's been sort of too onerous, not quick enough, and not personalized and so on. But we're getting there.
Well, I think also we can blame our society, our government, whoever else. But one of our problems with Beyond Compliance is that we've not been allowed to ping somebody an email until we've got written postal permission to do so, because that's the way it's set up, which I find quite difficult to understand. I get spam emails all the time. I don't particularly, but if you don't have to respond to an email, and you can tell them to run away. But in fact, it'd be so much easier if we in this country took a look at the whole business of actually contacting patients to get details, because we could do a much better job if we actually be able to email patients. And somebody's going to say, well, not everybody's got email. Well, we did a survey in Norwich 10, 12 years ago. And the patients we had this is patients who had hip replacements. The majority of them were pretty elderly, but I think it was 84% had email address or had access to emails, and that's a good many years ago now.
Yeah, love change now. And exactly that's, it's about making it easy. Email is becoming almost a need to have to navigate the new the digital world that we live in. But of course, I think that there still needs to be paper alternatives for some time. But it's about, I guess it's the same as with trying to build a detailed picture with many layers of data. We need to have different means of collecting that data as well.
Well, I think so, and as you say, paper is important. The NGR, it's paper at the moment. For us, which we use NGR's prom stuff, but it's round about £20 a patient. And when you consider the number of people in the NGR, it starts being incredibly expensive. Whereas if you can ping somebody an email, it's pennies.
Yeah. And I guess so and the NGR is now over 3 million. It's over 3 million.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you asked me another about the development in the future, because there's such big numbers. I know the guys there, who I know very well, are working with a group of AI experts, in fact, from Heidelberg. And I have little doubt that before long we will be able to interpret an awful lot of that data with algorithms and so on and so forth.
Absolutely, that would be seems a logical next step. But I think exploring the benefits of artificial intelligence in terms of this, I think will be that'll be the topic for a separate Joint School conversation, I think.
Well, I'll be very happy to do that, because I'm involved in machine learning on X-rays, but we haven't got as far as we'd hoped.
Okay, all right. Well, watch this space then on that. I think before we bring this particular session to an end, Keith, is there anything you would like to say to sort of round off this?
Well, I don't know. It's been a privilege to speak. I hope that what I've said is you can understand. I get pretty enthusiastic by all this stuff, and I'm quite capable of rabbiting on a bit. But I've been very privileged to be involved. But I'm only chairman of a really good team. I work with Northgate Public Services, the IT platform for us. They are an amazing bunch. And the surgeons who sit on ODEP, the Orthopaedic Data Evaluation Panel, and Beyond Compliance, they're all unpaid. We get our expenses paid, but it's voluntary, and they are an outstanding bunch of people, and great credit to them and to the profession. But I think it just shows you how really determined these people are in actually getting this as best as possible for patients, and their patience is the key to it. You know, it's not about egos, it's not about surgeons wanting to do this and that. It's actually about managing and looking after patients properly.
Absolutely. No, I would like to say the same to everyone out there watching this. Thank you so much for sending in your suggestions, your questions, for suggesting this as a topic for a Joint School video. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and keep up the good work, and we'll see you next week. So thank you very much.